Craig looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, trying to see if he could control the emotion on his face. It took a minute, but he achieved a calm look, exactly what he needed now. It will be difficult. He leaned against the side of the sink and stared at the porcelain beneath his face. I looked at the small ring of dirt around the drain, at the film covering the worn chrome. The shine has disappeared. Wow. Metaphors. He sighed. He listened, hoping that he would hear heavy footsteps down the corridor and then the sound of the front door closing. But I didn't hear. If he spends any more time in the bathroom, it will look like he's hiding. This cannot be allowed. Craig pulled himself together, looked in the mirror again, and decided that this was close enough to what he needed. Now comes the hard part. Craig opened the door, and with a slight creaking of the top hinge, the muffled noise of voices from the bedroom a short distance down the hall ceased. He walked through the door, walked down the hallway, down the stairs, and into the kitchen, loud. There he took out 2 mugs from the cupboard, the usual white one for himself and Ronnie's favorite, a clay one. He turned on the coffee maker, took out the hazelnut butter and milk. Either way, it won't last long. He made a few more preparations, just in case one of them is a phone call. Then I pre-downloaded the document onto my tablet lying in the living room. He was sitting at the kitchen bar, sipping coffee, when Ronnie appeared through the archway wearing one of her new blouses, showing off all of her new cleavage. She was wearing new blue jeans, very tight, which she used to show off her new ass. She wore glasses, which was a rarity these days, as she often wore her new contact lenses. She stood in the archway, looked at Craig, and brushed a strand of dyed blonde hair from her face behind her ear. Her expression was one of resignation. Craig gestured to the coffee in her mug on the other side of him on the bar, indicating that he wanted her to sit with him. Shaking her head slightly, her eyes sad, she took 2 steps towards the bar and sat down. So Ronnie began looking at her mug. Craig sat silently. After a few seconds, Ronnie looked up at him, hoping he would say something first. Craig looked at her silently as before. "So what now?" Ronnie asked, straightening up in her chair and realizing that she was slightly slouched. Now Craig asked out loud, his voice was calm and even. "Well, I think it's all over, don't you?" Ronnie slowly closed her eyes and sighed. "I don't want it to be like this," Ronnie told her husband. Craig said. "I can imagine that you don't want to, but after today, after everything you've done, I'm not even angry anymore, Ronnie. I'm just teared." She looked down at her mug, at the swell of her newly toned breasts. She reached out with both hands and wrapped them around the top of the mug, feeling the comforting warmth. Craig even added her favorite cream she could see and smell it. "This doesn't have to be the end." "I guess I was a bitch," Ronnie said. Craig snorted in agreement. "But we can survive this." Craig stared at Ronnie silently, tapping the sides of his mug with his fingertips. "Are you still going to be a bitch?" Craig asked after a long pause. Ronnie was not used to being at a disadvantage in relation to her husband. He had never spoken to her in such a tone. The question gave her a slight shock. "It's a rhetorical question." Craig said Ronnie was preparing to answer. After this, Craig nodded towards their bedroom. No chance." Ronnie sighed, trying to find a way to make Craig understand. "It doesn't mean anything." Ronnie tried to justify herself. "I don't feel anything for him. It's just for sex. I don't agree," Craig said, taking a light sip of his coffee. Ronnie reached across the table to touch her husband's hand, which was wrapped around his mug. "Don't touch me," Craig growled at her. Ronnie froze. "I don't want your twisted and corrupted flesh touching mine anymore," Craig told her, managing to get his emotions under control. Almost. Ronnie didn't know how to react to this. She pulled her hand away and picked up her mug again. She looked at Craig with pain on her face, not understanding why this man, her very smart, loving, patient husband who had given her so much, was rejecting her like this. He had never said anything like this before. She thought he liked the changes she made to herself. "I shouldn't have agreed to this," said Craig, carefully running his eyes over his wife, over the part that was visible above the bar counter. "That's when everything went wrong." "Honey, we did this to make me feel better." Ronnie reminded him, "Oh, I guess that's where it all started." There was anger in Craig's voice. And although his gaze was level, his voice was not. It was difficult for him to keep it all to himself. Liposuction, tightening, lifting, then the first augmentation, then dental surgeries, second breast surgery, just to make it fuller. Nose job, all this, yes. First, this was to make you feel better. Ronnie tried to answer something, but Craig interrupted her. After the first breast augmentation, it was about making myself as sexy as possible. Ronnie stood up so quickly that the bar stool fell over. And what's wrong with that? I've never been sexy. Craig began to take a deep breath to say something, but Ronnie was in shock, partly out of guilt, partly out of the need to go on the offensive, partly out of fear. I have always been a simple, familiar Veronica, Ronnie accused. Average Veronica. Nobody looked at me, nobody noticed me. Oh, yes, I was smart and a good student, but no one wanted me. Nobody wanted me. This was depressing me, Craig. So yeah, when I got the chance, I fixed it. Craig snorted. Now I'm sexy. Men want me. Ronnie pointed a finger at Craig, who was sitting at the kitchen counter and watching her. I have big tits. I have an ass. I have hair. My nose is fixed. Nobody looks past me anymore. You just can't deal with it. Craig looked at his wife with a grin. Ronnie wasn't interested. Your fragile little ego can't come to terms with the fact that I took my problem into my own hands, made myself what men want, and you saw it as a threat. Ronnie complained, her volume increasing. You can't handle being married to all this. Ronnie ran her hands along the sides of her chest, along her waist, along her hips, as long as she had enough hands. Then she raised her hands and ran them through her long blonde hair while puffing out her chest and swaying her hips. She practiced this movement and posed endlessly. You're small, Craig, Ronnie spat at her husband and changed her position. And you can't cope with what I am now? You would like me to remain simple, Veronica, live in our tiny house, drive our old cars, just live? Ronnie spewed at her husband, feeling that each time she was more and more in control of the situation. Well, I made my breasts and did not refuse further improvement. Ronnie justified herself. They sucked out the fat folds around my waist, and for this I received a bonus. They fixed my nose and gave me a new client. The sexier I get, the more I get, Craig. Ronnie put her hands on her hips and looked at her husband intently. He stared back, meeting her gaze, and didn't flinch. You men are so simple, Ronnie pricked. You're not thinking with your head, and I use it. Do you see these breasts? Ronnie leaned forward again. This breast, which you loved so much, brought me a prize of 5,000, and it will bring even more. Ronnie grabbed a lock of her hair. This hair that used to be black. Ronnie pointed to the curl with her other hand. You men react to blondes. I did this, and men started looking at me sideways. Ronnie turned around and stuck her butt out in Craig's direction. This ass, men stumble around trying to get a good look at me as I walk past them. Ronnie turned back to face her unimpressed husband. And all this, Ronnie gestured to herself, thanks to which I got a regional manager through my bed. I'll get my next promotion, Craig. It's all an investment, stupid. Ronnie shouted. Investment in me? In us? In our future? Of course, I take advantage of how stupid men can be, but I'm tired of not being noticed, of being passed over. If you can't handle it, leave. And if you can, then accept it. Should I leave? Craig asked. His tone was even normal volume, a slight smile on his face. If you're so weak that you can't handle it, then yes, get the hell out. Ronnie shouted. When you get back, maybe I'll let you try again, but you will have to change your attitude. No, Craig said, raising his cup and taking a sip. No, Ronnie screamed. No, no, Craig confirmed. Ronnie walked up to the bar and leaned her elbows on it, trying to look threatening to her husband. Then if you're staying, you'd better stick to the program, you asshole, she told him. I'm not going to put up with your attitude. Seriously, Craig, if you can't deal with this, get the hell out. No, Craig said again, his voice level. You are a stupid piece of shit, Ronnie spat at him. Finally, that's how it works. That's what I'm doing. Still not, Craig said, taking another sip. Ronnie's eyes widened and foam appeared at the corner of her mouth. Go ahead and say no, Ronnie said to Craig. That's how right I am. I'll go back upstairs and have sex with that guy in our bedroom. For this, he will promote me again. I will earn another 15,000 a year. I will have more clients and more bonuses. Craig shook his head, pretending he didn't care anymore. In truth, that's how it was. At the beginning of the conversation, he was depressed. But now he was determined. You can't stop me, Craig. Ronnie was outraged by his nonverbal denial. If you want to be with me, you better find out how everything will happen next. No, I don't want to be with you anymore, Ronnie, Craig said, putting down his mug. From now on, no. Everything is over. I have something to say about this, Ronnie spat. Not really, Craig said confidently. Here, let me prove something. Craig sat up, took a breath, and suddenly shouted, Hey, you in my bedroom, Vice President. You're breaking boundaries. Get out of my house. No, he won't leave. Ronnie pointed a finger at Craig. He'll definitely leave, Craig said, putting his elbows back on the tabletop. Stay there, Eric, Ronnie shouted towards the bedroom. Craig took his mug again with both hands. Ronnie stared at Craig for a few seconds, not really thinking. Then after a few breaths, she began to have thoughts again. Craig, it doesn't have to be this way. Ronnie angrily told her husband, I know I did you wrong. I know it hurts you. I wish you didn't see this. Ronnie vaguely waved her hand towards the bedroom. But this is what I need to move up. You man react to sex. You should know this. Craig nodded sideways, indicating that he understood, but also looked like he couldn't deny the fact. I feel good, honey. Is it true? I'm no longer ignored. If I can improve my well-being and achieve success, then why not? Ronnie reasoned. Why don't I do this? Well, probably because you were my wife, Craig said simply. I am still your wife, Ronnie attacked him. I don't feel anything for this guy. He is just the one who can give me something. No, that's not the point. Not really. But now I've decided to stop being patient with you, Craig said, sitting back down and starting to gesticulate as he spoke. I understand what you mean about not being noticed. I am not a significant person. I would describe myself as average, Craig decided. Sometimes it hurts. I agree with you. Ronnie crossed her arms over her chest, deciding to let Craig speak. I paid for the first liposuction. I paid for the second one, too. Paid for these tits. This haircut paid for this ass enlargement. I paid for all this. Craig casually pointed to Ronnie's body, and I did it because I loved you and believed you. Even when you started to change after your first breast augmentation, I didn't say anything because it was a big change for you. I knew things change and you get what you thought you needed, but my mistake was precisely that I was patient with you. Craig looked thoughtful. You have become ugly, Ronnie. Ronnie snorted derisively. First there were those comments about you insulting your sister at Thanksgiving. Craig said they were just dismissively rude. She looks a lot like you before. You shouldn't have treated her like that. Then when your mother tried to talk to you, you turned her off. Oh, sure. That day you didn't bully your sister anymore, but you also ignored her and didn't apologize. That's her problem. Ronnie said, no, this is a family problem. Craig ventured to object. You offended your sister. You offended your parents. And then she continued to do similar things to them. Have you noticed that they hardly talk to you anymore? Well, your brother, when talking to me, uses several colorful adjectives to describe you. I stopped protecting you a long time ago when he used them. Ronnie disagreed. That was around the time you started teasing me in bed with your changes. Craig continued thoughtfully. Yes, it was funny for a while, but then after that, it didn't stop being banter. Did it? Craig gave Ronnie a questioning look. After a while, you began to try to convince me that you were superior to me in some way. Did you like it? It took me a while to realize that you began to enjoy humiliating me only in the bedroom, but yes, it happened. So what? Ronnie asked with a grin. And then you started taking care of your old friends, Craig recalled. Jules, you were terrible to her. She was your witness, remember? Ronnie just shrugged. To hell with her if she doesn't see the obvious. Well, she saw it, Craig confirmed. That's why you're not friends anymore. Ronnie closed her eyes, took a deep breath in frustration, raised her eyebrows once, lowered them, and waited for Craig to continue. You were getting worse and worse, Craig said. I became further and further from Veronica, the woman with whom I fell in love. Yes, she was not a model or fashion model, but she was loving, funny, smart, a little adorably insecure, caring, helpful, a terrible cook, an amazing friend, and my best friend. Ronnie looked at Craig with concern on her face. And you? Craig gestured to Ronnie with his open hand. You're just an evil plastic doll, which I don't like and which I'm not going to tolerate anymore. Then you can get the hell out. Ronnie spat, pointing to the front door. No, Craig said simply. A knock was heard from the other end of the house. "Sorry," Craig said, standing up and leaving the room. "So what now?" Ronnie asked irritably, rolling her eyes at the knock on the door. The doorbell rang, and Ronnie heard Craig shout, "Are going!" Ronnie leaned back to see who was behind the door when Craig opened it. Opening the door, Craig greeted two uniformed police officers, a man and a woman. "Come in, come in." Having let two wary policemen in who quickly noticed Ronnie through the doorway into the kitchen, the policewoman asked, "Sir?" "Yeah, thanks for coming," Craig said, taking his wallet out of his pocket. He took out his driver's license and handed it to the male police officer. "Here is my ID. I am the only owner of the house. There is an intruder upstairs in my bedroom. Besides, I think I need help getting this woman out of the house." Craig nodded towards Ronnie. "Craig," Ronnie shouted, approaching him upstairs, asked the female officer, "Is he armed? What's happened? Craig, stop it!" Ronnie shouted, "Officers, this is not true." "Wait," said Craig, walking around the officers and Ronnie. He entered the room and took his tablet from the coffee table. Turning it on, he muttered, "Wait." Again, typing a copy of some document. He returned to the room and handed the tablet to the male officer. "What is this?" the officer asked, looking through the document. He looked at it, then looked at the driver's license. Handing the tablet back, the officer said, "Okay, you are the owner. What's going on here?" "Craig!" Ronnie exclaimed, both angry and slightly scared. She didn't like where this was going. It was not in her power. "I came home and found my wife in bed with her employer. They were engaged in lewd acts," Craig explained. "I told the guy he was trespassing on my property, but he's still here. I would like to see him removed, and I want to press charges." "Craig!" Ronnie exclaimed accusingly. The female officer muttered something about hating local calls. "Officers? I invited this man here," Ronnie explained, looking at her husband. "He doesn't violate anyone's boundaries." "Excuse me, ma'am," the officer said, trying not to look at the cleavage Ronnie was showing. "But if any family member claims that an outsider is trespassing, according to the city's new laws, that person must leave. If not," the officer shrugged. "Did you tell him that he wasn't welcome here?" asked the female officer. "Yes," said Craig. "I shouted about it from the stairs. I didn't speak in person. The door, as far as I know, was locked, and I didn't want to risk a face-to-face meeting. But I have a recording." Craig tapped his breast pocket, pointing to his phone. "Craig!" Ronnie hissed. "And also, I would like her." Craig nodded towards Ronnie. "But taken out of the room, I don't want her to be arrested. Just take her away." "Was there any violence?" asked the female officer while the man spoke into the radio. She looked at Ronnie. "What? No," said Ronnie. "I didn't touch him." Ronnie pointed at Craig. "I mean, did he hit you?" said the female officer. "But I will assume that nothing happened. Sir, may I ask you to show me where the bedroom is?" "Ask the male officer. My partner will stay here with this woman." "Of course," Craig replied, walking past the two women. "Ma'am, could you stay with me?" the female officer asked, looking at Ronnie. But Ronnie began watching her husband and the officer go up the stairs. "This is all wrong. I'm sure that's what you think, ma'am," the officer replied. 10 minutes later, a male officer shouted, "Let's go down!" Together with two others, he went down the stairs. Turning the corner at the bottom of the stairs, Chief Ronnie found himself in front. He was wearing suit pants. The button was fastened, but the fly and belt were undone. That was all there was to it. Pale chest and unruly hair combined with angry eyes told the story of an unhappy man. He gave Ronnie an angry look as he walked past her and headed for the exit. A male officer walked behind him. In one hand he had a jacket, shirt, tie, shoes with socks inside, and with the other hand he held the handcuffs that were on his wrists behind Boss Ronnie's back. As the male officer passed by, he glanced at his partner and nodded. "I'll let her pack her things," the female officer said to her partner. Craig stood to the side and watched what was happening. "Craig, don't do this," Ronnie asked her husband, realizing what was happening. "It's already done," Craig said sadly. "I don't feel safe when you're here. You let strangers into the house when I'm not around and you hide it from me. Your character has changed a lot lately. You need to leave. Take your clothes and what you need and we'll deal with the lawyers later." Craig said this mainly for the officer in case he needed a witness in court along with his camera. He believed that this was quite possible. "Craig, no!" Ronnie begged, holding out her hands. "We can work things out." We've been trying to do this for a long time. Craig said, his eyes closing as memories came flooding back to him. Did not work out. Everything is over. Sir, can we take some of her things? Asked the female officer. Ronnie was stunned into silence, realization approaching her like a plague. Of course, Craig said. She has a car in her garage. New BMW, not old Subaru. She can use it. Nodding, the officer turned to Ronnie and said, "Let's pack your things, honey." While Ronnie and the officer were going upstairs, Craig took out his phone and stopped recording. He didn't know how good the video would be, but he was sure the sound would be excellent. Standing still, he made sure the video was uploaded to the correct location and then sent copies to his lawyer, Ronnie's family members, and his own family members. It didn't take long. He asked the lawyer to inform Ronnie's employers about this, but he advised him to hold off. It is better that she is employed if the worst happens and divorce is suddenly on the agenda. Like now. Craig, no, we can work things out, Ronnie said as she walked down the stairs and saw her future ex-husband. I already tried, Craig said, putting the phone back in his pocket and turning off the sound. I talked to you about how you behave. I tried for several months. At first you listened and then you stopped. And a couple of weeks ago, after I saw you with your boss at a company party, I stopped too. I've spent the last couple of weeks gathering my thoughts on this matter. Craig, please, I already told you this, remember? Please, Craig said softly. Can you remember how many times? Come on, said the female officer, standing still and holding one of Ronnie's suitcases. Ronnie grabbed the handles of her suitcases and, looking incredibly lost, walked with the officer towards the garage. Craig stood there for a moment waiting. It seemed to him that everything was not over yet. When he heard the garage door open, the BMW drive out, and then the garage door closed, he exhaled and felt the tension ease a little. He collapsed on the sofa and sighed heavily. Then he cried for his wife, who he hoped would someday break out of what she had become. The coffee in the kitchen on the bar counter has long since cooled down. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.